What if I told you there was a moment on Family Feud so unexpected, so raw, that Steve Harvey felt the need to pick up his phone and call his wife during a commercial break? Welcome to Harvey's Highlights, the place where we dive deep into the untold, unforgettable moments behind the scenes of television's most iconic shows. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story will leave you speechless. It was a bright Wednesday afternoon in Atlanta, and the Family Feud studio was alive with its usual energy. The audience laughed, the families bantered, and Steve Harvey, charismatic, playful, teasing, did what he always does best: make everyone feel at home. That day, the Martinez family from San Antonio was facing off against the Harper family from Chicago. Both sides brought energy, excitement, and determination. Contestants shouted answers, the buzzers rang, and the studio felt like it could burst with laughter at any moment. But there was one contestant who caught Steve's attention immediately: 28-year-old Ethan Collins, a young man whose quiet demeanor and steady gaze set him apart from the chaos around him. There was nothing flashy about Ethan. No wild antics, no over-the-top enthusiasm. Just a calm, almost serene presence that made you lean in and pay attention. During introductions, Steve knelt down to Ethan's level. "All right, Ethan," he said, his voice warm, teasing, but curious. "Tell me, what do you do for a living?" Ethan smiled softly. "I'm a firefighter, sir." The crowd erupted in applause. Steve's eyes widened slightly. "A firefighter? Lord, we need y'all out there keeping folks safe. You're doing God's work, boy." Ethan nodded, modest. "Just trying to help people." Steve chuckled. "You say that like it's easy, but I know it ain't. I know it ain't." Little did Steve know, Ethan wasn't just a firefighter. He was a cancer survivor, and the answer he was about to give would shake the studio to its core. The round progressed normally. Families answered, laughter erupted, and Steve played the game like the professional he is. But then came the pivotal question. Name something that gives you hope when you're in the darkest moment. Steve called on Ethan. The audience leaned in. The lights seemed to dim slightly, as if signaling the gravity of what was about to happen. Ethan looked up, calm, steady, and said simply, "The voice of the person I love the most." The studio went completely silent. Steve's eyes widened. He put down the cards in his hand and stepped back. The words weren't just an answer. They were a story, a lifeline, a reminder of love and survival. For a moment, Steve didn't speak. He just looked at Ethan, then slowly raised his hand to his face. And then, as the producers began to cue the commercial break, Steve did something no host had ever done. He pulled out his phone and dialed. The cameras faded to black as the announcer called for a commercial break. But Steve Harvey didn't move to his usual side stage spot, didn't crack jokes to fill the silence. He stood frozen, phone in hand, staring down at the screen. "Lord," he muttered under his breath before hitting dial. Seconds later, his wife answered. Steve's voice was low, almost reverent. "Baby, I need to tell you something real quick. You're not gonna believe this." Back in the studio, the audience whispered among themselves. Some thought Steve was sharing a private joke with the crew. Others noticed the unusual seriousness in his expression. There was a stillness in the room that had nothing to do with the game. Steve spoke softly to his wife, explaining what had just happened. "There's this young man, Ethan, quiet guy, firefighter. But what he just said about hope, it stopped me cold. He said the voice of the person he loves most gives him strength. And honey, that's all he needed to survive cancer. That's what kept him going through chemo, surgeries, nights when he couldn't breathe. He clung to love." He paused, glancing back at the stage where Ethan stood with his family, unaware of the impact he had just made. "I had to call you because I can't even explain it. You've got to hear this. You know what it's like when something hits you so hard you can't talk? That's right now." Across the studio, the crew leaned in, captivated. Even behind the cameras, the production team felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't a typical Family Feud taping. It was something far bigger. Steve turned slightly, still speaking to his wife. "I've hosted thousands of episodes, baby. I've seen families laugh, cry, fight, celebrate, but I've never seen anything like this. This young man just reminded everyone in that room, including me, why we hold on, why we fight, why we love. He inhaled deeply. I had to call you because if I don't, I might lose it right here on stage. And I can't mess this up. This is bigger than TV. On the other end, she stayed quiet, listening. After a moment, she whispered, Steve, let them feel it. Don't hold back. Steve nodded, more to himself than anyone else. He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and turned toward the stage. The energy in the room had shifted. The audience leaned forward, sensing that what happened next would go far beyond the game. He walked back to Ethan, placing a hand on his shoulder. Boy, Steve said softly, you just reminded all of us why some voices, some people, matter more than anything else. And today you gave the world a gift. Ethan looked confused but nodded humbly. I didn't mean to. Steve smiled, shaking his head. You didn't have to mean to. That's the point. You lived it. And that's what made everyone in this room stop and remember why life is worth fighting for. The audience, once quiet, began to clap. Softly at first, then louder, until the entire studio resonated with applause. Steve Harvey, the man known for timing jokes perfectly, had found a moment where no words could compete with truth. Steve Harvey stood beside Ethan, the applause still echoing through the studio. But he didn't start the next round. He didn't read the next question. Instead, he looked at Ethan with that quiet intensity he reserves for the moments that matter most. Ethan, Steve said, his voice softer than usual, you just reminded everyone here and millions watching at home what hope really looks like, that voice you hold on to. That's bigger than anything on this board. That's life. He signaled to a production assistant who wheeled out a small podium. On it sat a neatly folded firefighter's jacket, crisp and new. The audience murmured in curiosity. Steve picked it up and held it gently. This, he said, holding the jacket up, is for you. Not because of the game, not because of the points, but because of what you represent. Courage, strength, love, everything that kept you fighting when most would have given up. Ethan's eyes widened. Steve, I don't know what to say. You don't gotta say nothing, Steve replied. You just gotta know this. Every day you wake up, every time you touch a life, every time you hold the hand of someone who's scared, you're doing what matters. And that's bigger than any cash prize on this stage. He knelt slightly, carefully slipping the jacket over Ethan's shoulders. It hung oversized at first, but that didn't matter. The gesture was symbolic, a tangible reminder that bravery, love, and hope carry more weight than any game. The audience was on their feet now, many wiping tears from their faces. Cameras zoomed in on the moment, but Steve wasn't concerned about the shot. He was concerned about the man in front of him. A survivor, a hero, a reminder of what life is truly about. Ethan, Steve said, placing a hand on his shoulder. You got a whole world behind you now, and we're all gonna remember what you taught us today. The game can wait. The heart, it cannot. Ethan nodded, the weight of the moment sinking in. He looked at Steve, then at the audience, and finally whispered, Thank you for seeing me. Steve smiled, standing back. No, son. Thank you for living, for fighting, for reminding us all what it means to never give up. The applause continued for several minutes. The kind of applause that doesn't just celebrate a game show answer. It celebrates life itself. And as the cameras rolled silently, Steve Harvey turned slightly to the booth, motioning to keep filming. Let them see this, he said. Let the world see how powerful one voice can be. The studio, once filled with laughter and games, now carried a new energy, reverence, awe, and the unspoken truth that some moments are bigger than television. The taping continued, but it wasn't the same. The jokes, the buzzers, the usual back and forth between families felt almost secondary. Everyone in the studio, audience, contestants, crew, carried the weight of Ethan's story with them. Steve Harvey, ever the entertainer, had hosted thousands of episodes. He had seen tears, laughter, triumphs, and embarrassments. But nothing like this. Nothing that made him stop, walk off set, call his wife, and kneel before a contestant mid-show. After the cameras stopped rolling, producers, crew members, and even other contestants approached Ethan and Steve, sharing their own stories of hardship and hope. Nurses, firefighters, teachers, parents, people from all walks of life, thanked Ethan for showing what it meant to fight and survive. Steve stayed by Ethan for a long time after the taping. He didn't joke, he didn't riff, he just talked. "You know, son," he said quietly, "I've seen a lot in my career. I've laughed. I've cried. I've hosted thousands of moments. But today reminded me why I do this job. Not for the ratings, not for the money, but for the people." Ethan looked down at the firefighter jacket Steve had given him. "I didn't come here to make anyone feel anything," he said softly. "You didn't have to," Steve replied. "Life did it for you. You just lived it." Within hours, the clips of Ethan's answer and Steve's reaction spread online. Fans, survivors, and families across the country shared the moment. Social media lit up with praise, awe, and tears. Hashtags like #SteveHarveyEthanMoment and #FamilyFeudStopped trended nationwide. News outlets picked it up. Interviewers reached out to both Steve and Ethan, wanting to know what had caused the host to literally call his wife during the commercial break. But Steve was modest. He said in interviews, "I didn't call her because it was dramatic or for TV. I called her because I needed someone to understand what I just saw." This young man reminded us all what hope is, what love is, what it means to fight for life. That's bigger than anything I've ever seen on a stage. Ethan returned to his firefighting duties, quietly saving lives while carrying the weight of his moment on national television. But he also realized something profound. The world, even for a brief moment, had paused to see courage and love in its purest form. And Steve Harvey? He kept the memory close. He told friends and family that day about Ethan's answer, about the call to his wife, about how one simple sentence, "The voice of the person I love the most," had made him stop everything he was doing and witness humanity at its finest. It wasn't just a moment for Family Feud. It became a lesson, a reminder, a story that people would share for years. That sometimes the bravest, most impactful moments happen when someone speaks their truth, and someone else is willing to stop and listen. Weeks after the taping, the story of Ethan Collins and Steve Harvey's reaction spread far beyond the studio. Clips of that single moment, Steve handing Ethan the firefighter jacket, kneeling beside him, the pause in the game, were shared across social media platforms, gaining millions of views in a matter of hours. People weren't just reacting to a game show clip. They were reacting to something far deeper. A reminder that courage and love could move even the most seasoned entertainer to stop everything and acknowledge the human heart. Fans began sharing their own stories of struggle, survival, and hope. Cancer survivors, frontline workers, parents, teachers. People from every corner of life sent messages about how Ethan's answer resonated with them. "It reminds me why I keep going," wrote one viewer. "I lost my husband last year, but hearing Ethan's story makes me believe love can still guide me," wrote another. Hundreds of letters, emails, and comments poured in for both Steve and Ethan, each one reinforcing the impact of that single, honest moment. For Steve Harvey, the story lingered long after the cameras were off. In interviews, he repeatedly referenced the way Ethan's words changed him. "I've hosted thousands of episodes," he told one reporter. "But that moment, that quiet, honest, beautiful answer, made me stop and realize something. We spend so much time thinking about entertainment, about laughs, about ratings. But the truth, the real work, the real magic, happens when you let people's lives teach you something." Steve spoke often of the phone call he made to his wife during the commercial break. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't staged. It was simply a man witnessing courage in its purest form and needing to share it with the person he loved most. "I had to call her because I needed someone else to feel it," he explained. "I needed to tell her, this is what matters. This is why we're here. To see people live, to see them love, to see them fight when it's hard." Ethan, meanwhile, quietly returned to his firefighting duties. But the jacket Steve had given him remained a symbol, a reminder not only of his own survival but of the power his honesty had to affect millions of people. He would later describe the gift as more than a jacket. It was a mantle of courage, an emblem of the truth that life's most profound moments often arrive unannounced. In the weeks following, Ethan began volunteering at local hospitals and community centers, speaking with patients and survivors about hope, resilience, and love. He told them about the moment on Family Feud, about Steve Harvey stopping the show, about the studio full of people who were reminded, just for a moment, that life can be fragile but also incredibly beautiful. He emphasized that hope isn't something you find. It's something you hold on to, often in the hands, words, or voices of those you love. For Steve Harvey, the moment didn't fade with time either. He kept a photo from that taping on his desk. A simple image of Ethan, the oversized firefighter jacket draped over him, both men smiling through tears. He said it reminded him every day that hosting a game show is about far more than answering questions or awarding prizes. It's about connection, he explained. It's about seeing people, really seeing them. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they teach you something you'll carry the rest of your life. Months later, the network released a special segment compiling the moment. While edited for time, it captured the essence of what made it unforgettable. A young man's courage, a host's humanity, and the rare power of a simple, honest answer. Viewers around the world were touched, inspired, and reminded that real life often delivers lessons far more profound than any scripted line or staged punchline. Steve and Ethan eventually reunited in a private meeting. They spoke at length about survival, love, and the responsibility that comes with sharing your truth. Steve gave Ethan a second firefighter jacket, this one personalized with his name and the words, "For every life you touch, every heart you lift, every hand you hold, you remind the world what courage really is." Ethan kept the first jacket as a memento of the moment that changed both his life and Steve's perspective on the show. He later described it as a talisman, a reminder that the courage to speak your truth, even on a game show stage, could inspire millions. And the impact didn't stop there. Viewers reported being inspired to reconnect with loved ones, to speak words of encouragement, to hold on to hope in the darkest of times. Teachers shared the video in classrooms, firefighters and healthcare workers passed it around in break rooms, and ordinary people discussed it at kitchen tables and family gatherings. One woman wrote, "Watching Steve stop everything to honor Ethan reminded me that love is the most powerful thing we can carry. And sometimes it's louder than any alarm, any buzzer, any board on a stage." As for Steve Harvey, he reflects on that day often. In interviews, he says he learned a lesson that no hosting tip, no comedy routine, no television moment could teach him. Sometimes you gotta stop the game. Sometimes you gotta put the points down, turn off the music, and just see people. See their hearts, their courage, their love. That's the real prize. That's what life's about. If this story made you stop and think, if it reminded you of the power of honesty, love, and courage, take a moment now to subscribe to Harvey's Highlights. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what you would have done if you were in that studio, or how this moment reminds you to hold on to the people and love that keep you going. And make sure to stay tuned. The next story on Harvey's Highlights will be another unforgettable journey into the moments that define us. Remember this, the game can always wait. The heart cannot. Steve Harvey called his wife that day, but what he witnessed stayed with millions. Ethan's answer reminded the world that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet, steady, and delivered in the most unexpected of places. Even on a game show stage, under bright lights with millions watching. It's a story that continues to inspire, a lesson that continues to resonate, and a moment that proves, beyond a doubt, that human connection, truth, love, and courage can stop anything, even a game show host in his tracks.